Welcome to a new episode of InFocus with Ejaz Haider. This program is supported by the Center for Security, Strategy and Policy Research. CESPR is an autonomous policy research center housed in the University of Lahore, and it tackles issues that impact contemporary security and strategic developments. This program is part of that effort. When US President Donald Trump came up with a peace plan for Gaza, it was welcomed primarily for the ceasefire part of it. And I say this because as we're going to discuss this, and we'll get into that, it's not essentially about, it's not either a plan or necessarily about peace in a broader sense. But it was welcomed because so brazenly was a Zionist entity killing the people that it was important to at least get that slaughter stopped. Since the partial ceasefire came into effect, over 600 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza. 60% of the territory is still occupied by the Zionist occupation force. Trump also came up with the idea of a board of peace, which is supposed to oversee reconstruction in Gaza. The plan and this BOP have no participation from the Palestinians up until this point. The promise that the Zionist entity will not annex West Bank was taken out of the final draft. Incidentally, it must be reminded to our viewers that this was started as a 21-point plan, and it was then placed before Benjamin Netanyahu. And one of the first points was taken out of this draft. And so we're going to discuss that also. In fact, the plan makes no mention of occupied West Bank and the illegal settlements. And there are two types. The type of settlements that the Zionist entity actually accepts, and then there are outposts which are not at least legally accepted by the Zionist entity. It also has no mention of Jerusalem as the capital of a Palestinian state. The prospect of a Palestinian state has been maybeed and thrown into some unforeseen future if and when the Palestinian Authority would be reformed, which obviously is a Sisyphean task, if you ask me. Who will determine that? The US, the Zionist entity, the international community, the United Nations, or the Palestinians themselves? There's no mention of any process or timelines regarding a peace deal between the Zionist entity and the Palestinians, no condemnation of the genocide. And then, of course, the reason we're discussing this is because Trump has had this Board of Peace meeting, which incidentally has been given a wide berth, frankly, by Trump's own allies. But there were some Muslim states, including Pakistan, who seemed fairly eager to join this Board of Peace, mostly for their own national interests. So to discuss this plan, if it can be called that, and the Board of Peace, if it can be called that, I have with me Sami Al-Arian, who's a professor and founding director of the Center for Islam and Global Affairs at Istanbul Zaim University. He has also authored dozens of studies, articles, and books on topics related to Islam in the West, the Islamic Ummah, Islamophobia, civil rights, Palestine, the Arab Spring, the Middle East, and American foreign policy. And he lived in the US for 4 decades, where he was a tenured professor. Professor Al-Arian, thank you so much for being on the program. As I said, frankly, one doesn't have to make any bones about this. It's neither a plan nor it's about peace. And there's been a Board of Peace meeting. And frankly, there's a lot of discussion, analyses, and the rest of it, which basically says that Trump has expanded this and actually wants it to somehow become a substitute for the United Nations. If we also link it up with what, the national security strategy says, what US Secretary of State Mark Rubio has stated, even at the Munich Security Conference, all of these little pieces start coming together. And of course, it's important to mention that there was this over 60-minute interview with Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, where Witkoff went off saying that, Kushner, Jared has been working on this for the last 2 years. And, Jared's face just turned color because he obviously didn't want want Witkoff to mention that. So give me your sense. And by the way, the end of the program, I also want to talk a little bit about this military buildup around Iran. But let's first get your initial, thoughts about this particular meeting and this plan and whatever Board of Peace overall.
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me. What we are witnessing today is a brazen attempt by Trump and his administration to change the conversation. If you recall back in September, during the UN General Assembly meeting, the whole talk was about a political project that was being pushed by France and Saudi Arabia in order not only just to stop the genocide, a genocide that claimed tens of thousands of Palestinians, perhaps as much as 70 or 80,000 people, 70% of which are women and children. But also we have total destruction of Gaza, and people were talking about the establishment of a Palestinian state. Then Trump came along and started promoting his plan to stop the genocide, devoid completely of any political horizon or a political project. It's not even a humanitarian project. First, he was promoting the removal of the Palestinians from Gaza so that he can establish what he called the Riviera, his Riviera of the Middle East. And then slowly, several Muslim countries met with him on September 22nd. Pakistan was one of them, Turkey and Indonesia and a few other Arab countries. And he pledged that he will try to stop the carnage, the genocide, but he wanted to present his own plan. And when you look at the plan, what he called the plan, it's really not a plan at all. It's an attempt for the Israeli regime, for the Zionist regime, to implement or to fulfill its objectives that it hasn't been able to do it through military means, by political means. All what he had been talking about at the time and still, not only that he wanted to free what he called the Israeli hostages or the Israeli captives, which he did, including obviously the dead ones, the bodies, but also now all his focus is on what is called decommissioning or disarming the resistance movements without any regards to the fact that the Palestinians have been under occupation for decades. The fact that Gaza has been under a crippling siege for over 17 years. The fact that Palestinians have lost almost all their belongings, including maybe as much as 90% of residences. And then you can also talk about the hospitals, the schools, the markets, the power grids, and everything else. So here he's talking about he wants to rebuild Gaza, but only after Hamas and the Islamic Jihad and other resistance movements have surrendered their arms, this is totally, it's a legal fiction. What he created as what he calls Board of Peace is a legal fiction that does not exist, does not really have much legitimacy, even though he passed a resolution based on the notion that there will be a ceasefire or there will be a cessation of the genocide, but actually nothing has been put in concrete. He put this as two stages. The first stage has already been fulfilled. Hamas and the other groups have given their hostages back, but all the other points that Israel was supposed to fulfill, such as the trucks, the aid trucks, about 600 a day, has not been fulfilled. The opening of the crossing of the Rafah crossing, hundreds of people supposed to be on both sides. They're only allowing a trickle of people going in or out with lots and lots of harassment for those people who want to go. And there were thousands of people supposed to go out for their studies, for medical needs, as well as for jobs and so on and so forth. They have been denied. The equipment that's supposed to go in to remove the rubble, the debris, after 2 years of genocide, not been allowed. We're talking about acute need for caravans and tents and others under a very severe cold weather, hasn't been fulfilled. As you pointed out, Israel is in control of 60% of Gaza under occupation, under direct occupation now. No one's calling them to account. So what you have here is a very difficult situation. Yesterday, he did convene several countries. Most of them are inconsequential, actually. They really don't play much role except as a window dressing. So he built this this narrative that somehow he's going to go and rule Gaza, be in charge of Gaza. He's built this fiction, legal fiction, as him being in charge of a board of peace that is comprised at the upper level of 7 people, 6 of which are Americans. Actually, not just Americans, but they are from his own administration, his son-in-law and his friend Wickoff, and his Secretary of State and Vice President and Deputy National Security Advisor, and a businessman. And then you have the World Bank president. And then he has another body in which Palestinians are not represented. He brought these imperialist minds, as if we're back 100 years ago, with a mandate, with a British mandate, people who are coming to be in charge of all the decision making as far as Gaza is concerned. And then he has this technocratic Palestinian committee in which they basically are like Palestinians who are supposed to serve their masters or implement whatever decisions he's made. And the first decisions he wants is to disarm the resistance. None of that really has any legal precedent. None of that has any legitimacy, in fact, to strip the Palestinians of agency, to strip the Palestinians of representation, not to talk about a political horizon, about independence, about Palestinian state, about self-determination, about freedom. None of that is being addressed.
Absolutely.
And on top of that, my last point, and on top of that, he says the ultimate goal, by the way, this entity is going to be president for life. So, it shows that he is in charge of everything. But the ultimate goal here, if the Palestinians reform, if they accept Israel, if they change the narrative, if they start complying with whatever dictates Israel has, the ultimate is what's called the deal of the century, which is nothing but bridges and tunnels that would connect different Palestinian towns, nothing close to a Palestinian state.
Absolutely. The same Bantustans. No, actually, I was going to come to that. There's a lot of confusion by design, but you beat me to the punch. Marco Rubio was consistently denied that a genocide has taken place in Gaza. Steve Witkoff, as you mentioned, has no prior Middle East diplomatic experience and is basically a real estate guy. Jared Kushner is the architect of the 2020 plan and a settlement advocate, along with this former Trump 1.0 U.S. ambassador to the Zionist entity, David Friedman, who was constantly in the company of Smotrich and Ben-Gvir. Mark Rowan, who's the Wall Street financier and who intimidated the U.S. campuses into banning Palestinian protests. And then, of course, the name of Tony Blair, who's essentially an Iraq war criminal. So the issue now is, where do we go from here? I want to specifically focus on the Muslim states or the Muslim majority states who are part of this board of peace. One of the arguments here in Pakistan was, and personally, I'm opposed to that argument, but I'm just presenting the argument that was presented by people who were supporting the government's decision to become part of this board of peace, was that it's better to be inside the tent than to be outside the tent. So while you are inside the tent, you can actually influence how things pan out. But here's the problem. The Zionist entity is at that table, and the United States is sitting next to it on that side of the table. Everyone else is on the other side of the table. So how much can the Muslim majority states actually influence? And interestingly enough, Egypt is not part of it. So I want to ask you, how much can these states influence this? Trump has told us that Indonesia is also prepared to send troops as part of the international stabilization force. In Pakistan, the Foreign Office statement which was put out was essentially Pakistan's historic traditional position linked to the 2002 Arab Initiative, which, as you know, was rejected by the Zionist entity. But nonetheless, that is the whole thing. And we can come back to why this two-state solution is essentially a chimera. But in practical terms, what do you think these states can achieve by being on the board of peace?
Well, my understanding of these 8 countries, 5 Arab countries and 3 Muslim countries, Turkey, Pakistan, and Indonesia, is that they have been watching a genocide unfolding for 2 years. Muslim states met twice in Saudi Arabia, once on November 11th, 2023, and a second time exactly a year later, November 11th, 2024. We're talking about 57 countries, which has tremendous amount of leverage as well as wealth, as well as military power. Yet, they weren't able to take a single decision that is capable of pressuring the United States or Israel to stop the carnage, the genocide. And because of that...
I'm sorry, may I just interject here, because you're making an extremely important point that I want to add one thing with reference to the 21st November 2023, where some of the states had asked those states that are now part of the Abraham Accords to at least downgrade diplomatic relations. But the UAE and Morocco and Bahrain flatly refused to do that.
Exactly. And that's part of the problem, which I will address in a bit. So you have these 57 Muslim countries unable, they only agreed on one thing and one thing only, which is to get the aid, the massive aid that the Palestinians needed. Even they couldn't deliver that. They couldn't bring one bottle of water to a thirsty child unless Netanyahu said so. So this feeling of impotence, of paralysis, made them at the end go to Trump. And basically they thought that if they can go and give him all the praise that he seeks as a sociopath, that somehow this is going to stop the genocide. And that's what they did. They went, and knowing fully well that the leverage is limited, and that if they can just stop the carnage, if they can stop the mass murder, the genocide, that would be an accomplishment. And they joined. And with that, that's the best they can get. And I think most of them realize that all the political projects and everything else are not being realized. And it's very strange when you look at the 2 alternatives we had. We had Trump plan, which leads to nothing. And you had a Russian plan in which it was calling about the United Nations to intervene and to establish a Palestinian state with some mandates and with some goals that would actually implement what is called the international legitimacy. And yet the Muslim countries went and praised the Trump plan and undercut the Russian plan. At any rate, so it's just a matter of these countries being weak, but more importantly, not independent and not sovereign. This is the crux of the problem. Most of the Muslim countries today do not enjoy real independence. Most of them are vulnerable, particularly on the economic side, is that they can be easily extorted and pressured. And because of that, they can't do much, not to also talk about the different divisions, as you pointed out, those who have already normalized with the Zionist regime and those who have already been in the camp of the United States. Everybody knows that the US is not a bystander. It's not an honest broker. The United States is part and parcel of the problem. It's a partner to the genocide. It's complicit in every act. It has financed, it has funded, it has armed, it has protected, it has shielded the Zionist regime throughout these 2 years, and therefore no one can claim that the United States is playing a positive role. But because the US also is a global power, it has its own agenda, globally speaking, it has its own challenges. This genocide could not have gone forever. The Zionists were not able to bring the Palestinians to their knees. They were not able to bring Hamas and the Islamic Jihad and the other resistance movements to raise the white flag. And meanwhile, they are paying with reputation. They treat the government, and then the United States obviously is also paying a heavy price with the rise of China and with the global order condemning this genocide and trying to move from it and trying to pressure it. We've seen this all over the place. So they had to come up with something, and that's what we ended up with. But the more important point here is that they're trying to turn Palestine from being a project for self-determination, for freedom, for independence, for sovereignty, into some kind of a humanitarian crisis. It's like the Palestinians have been hit with a tornado or earthquake or something, not that there has been a genocide. And no one is talking about the perpetrator of that genocide. And even they are pressuring the Palestinians to give in to the Israeli dictates and Israeli demands. So the Muslim countries really need to shape up, and they need to bring more of their leverage, because they have a lot of leverage, to bring it to the fore. The United States needs the Muslim world if it's going ever to recover any kind of reputation or any kind of a status in its rivalry with China.
Absolutely. I mean, the nuclear theorist Herman Kahn talked about the fact that the different rungs between quitting and maximum response. And there was a lot that Egypt and Jordan could do without actually mobilizing troops or anything. I mean, they could have downgraded relations. Egypt could have insisted on the illegality under the peace agreement by the Zionist entity at the Rafah crossing, but none of that happened. But I want to just, because you mentioned a very important point, this was essentially Mike Pence, the former U.S. Vice President. He spoke to David Friedman, the Orthodox Jewish U.S. ambassador that I talked about. And this was at the Trinity Broadcasting Network. And this is what Mike Pence said. One of the historic errors the US made, going back to the Carter administration, was the fiction of being an honest broker. I think what President Trump understood was, if the world knows nothing else, the world needs to know this, that America stands with Israel. I mean, this is what Mike Pence has said on the record. And then at the Munich Security Conference, Sheikh Abdullah bin Ahmed Al Khalifa, Under Secretary at Bahrain's Foreign Ministry, is on record as having said, and I quote from what he said, there is intelligence cooperation between Bahrain and Israel. Mossad is in Bahrain and they are present in the region. Intelligence cooperation is part of our ongoing partnership between Bahrain and Israel and will continue. So, 3 major Mossad stations in the region: Abu Dhabi, Baku, Manama. So that's what the situation here is, frankly. Now, the thing is that Trump, as you said, and that was a very important point, that he's changing the conversation. And we know what the change of the conversation means. It is essentially going back to the Abraham Accords by prescinding the Palestinians and allowing the Zionist entity to slowly expel and exterminate them. That has not changed one bit. And the other thing is that the conversation is focused on Gaza, while this slow, structured violence is going on in the occupied Palestinian territories. And there's not a word about that. And this plan does not include that. So how do you, of course, there's a lot else going on in the Middle East, and we will come to that shortly. How is this, how will the Muslim countries, who are now part of the Board of Peace, reconcile their desire to do something for the Palestinians, assuming that they do have a desire to do something for the Palestinians, and what is actually going on physically on the ground?
Well, we have to actually look at this situation at 2 levels. The first level is the level of concerning your question, the Palestinians, and I think the Muslim countries, particularly those on the board of peace, their overall goal is to make sure the war does not restart, that the genocide does not come back again, and that the Palestinians stay on their land. Assuming, the best of intentions, obviously there are some regimes, there are some governments in this part of the world who have allied, unfortunately, themselves with the Zionist idea, which brings me to the second level. And the second level has to do with Israel's goals, strategic goals in the region for since its founding, but more importantly, since Tufan al-Aqsa. The overall goal of Israel is to be the hegemon, is to be the most important and most powerful country, not just at the level of capabilities, but in reality. Because what Tufan al-Aqsa did to Israel is that it is no longer going to count on intentions and penetration and ability to try to devise what the other regimes have. Now it wants to actually be in control, use all necessary means to make sure that all its enemies, and in this regard, every single country, every single regime, every single nation is perceived as an enemy to Israel, that all their capabilities would be stripped from them. That answers to a lot of what's going on today, whether vis-a-vis Iran or even vis-a-vis other countries. They still have in this crosshairs, not only Iran, but also Turkey and Pakistan and everything else. So what they want to do is to take the advantage. They think that after 2 years of genocide, that they have the upper hand, that they feel that there is a sense of victory, which is an illusion. They are delusional to think that they have a victory at hand here, but that's how they behave. And that behavior will come crashing hard if they try actually to hit Iran or try to go beyond Iran to other countries. The bottom line is that Muslim countries now are beginning to wake up. You could see now there is a horizon where some Muslim countries, such as Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Turkey, Qatar, and others, who are trying to see what they could do to make sure that the regional order is not collapsing in favor of Israel. Because if Israel is capable of actually bringing the US power to either have regime change in Iran or to have to hit Iran very hard to the point it collapses, which I think is a tall order, not going to happen, or try to strip other countries of their power, and then Israel would enjoy a total impunity and a total hegemony in the region, then we're talking about a very dark time waiting for the Muslim world. I think now Muslim countries are starting to wake up. That explains a lot of what's happening between, for instance, the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia. It explains a lot of what's happening in terms of the regional resistance against an all-out war against Iran, and it also exposed Israel, whether it's in Syria, in Lebanon, in different parts, where it's trying to hit all the Arab capabilities and try to impose its own control over the whole region.
Absolutely. I mean, but let me take this forward. In 2002, 2003, I was at Brookings, and I had a ringside view of how the Zionists basically, even though the Bush administration was predisposed to attacking Iraq, but they were also making a lot of effort to push the United States into it. And I had some conversations with, because Saban Center at Brookings was bringing in these Israeli Zionist intelligence officers and former military officers and also analysts. And so I had some conversations with them and also attended their working dinners and lunches. And it became very clear to me that the Zionist entity has two security rings that it wants to take care of. One is the inner security ring, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon. And one is the outer security ring, which Iraq, Iran, and Libya. And so Egypt and Jordan were out of the equation because they had made their peace with the Zionist entities. So that left Lebanon and Syria in the inner ring. and Iraq, where they wanted the United States to go in. And 2011, we saw what happened in Libya. Now, the only state standing is Iran in the outer ring. And the way this entire military buildup is going, and the way the talks agenda has been broadened, it is actually designed to fail. Because in order for Iran to, for the sake of the argument, to accept it, it's essentially like cutting off its hands without any guarantees of sanctions relief or that it will not be attacked. So there's this whole thing about this a kind of inevitability, if you will, about conflict, and what the nature of that conflict obviously remains to be seen, because Allah is the only He is Al-Alim, no one else is. So we can only speculate about that. But it seems to me, and I this is without prejudice to the point that you're making with reference to this awakening about Muslim countries understanding that this is what the Zionist plan is. But it seems to me that they still do not have the capability, the actual capabilities to thwart an attack if it comes. And that in and of itself is going to change the dynamics in many ways of the region.
Yes. So what we have today, Israel has 3 existential threats from their standpoint. One is Palestinian demography. They try to deal with that through a genocide and ethnic cleansing, and they think this is a historic opportunity. Of course, they failed in Gaza. Had they been successful in Gaza, they would have followed that up in the West Bank. But they will try and continue to try. And Trump's plan is part of that, even though it put some restrictions on this plan. But they will try. The second existential threat is a conventional war. But that conventional war cannot happen without Egypt. So when they took Egypt outside the equation, that threat has been withdrawn for now. But the third one, which is having a nuclear country in which they can basically neutralize their nuclear monopoly. Pakistan could have played that role, but Pakistan decided that its nuclear power for now is only against India, has nothing to do with Israel. Several other countries tried to get into this nuclear club. Israel has always tried to neutralize them, whether it was Iraq in 1981 or Syria 2007. But now their eyes is towards Iran. Iran does not have the intention. There is no proof or evidence that Iran is trying to build a nuclear weapon, but they don't wait for proofs. But more importantly, the reason Iran has been at the crosshairs and it's been a target of Israel for decades is because of its firm commitment towards the Palestinian issue. It's the only country in the Muslim world. It backs its rhetoric with action. It arms, it funds, it trains, it brings technology. It's pretty committed to the Palestinian, and it takes a very hard line towards Israel because it is committed to the social justice that the Palestinians deserve in a way beyond the rhetoric of some other countries. And that's why it's been a target. Now, if you look at the history, at least since the early 90s, you'll find that this commitment has been not only in terms of resources, but also in terms of real action. Now, in the latest episode, you could see that with the feeling of this invincibility, or somehow they are able to defeat their enemies, they want to go for the kill. They understood that they cannot get any kind of a deal with Iran on this, so their strategy is regime change. They want to knock down the regime, but they can't do it. They lack the capability. Iran has enough missiles and have enough military power. Not only it can defend itself, but it can devastate the Israeli regime from the inside. And that's why they need the United States. And that's why they have been recruiting during the Bush administration. The neocons were playing that role. And now we have actual Zionists within the administration making these calls, whether it's Rubio or the other players who have been at the extreme side of adopting the Zionist, not only the Zionist outlook, but even the Zionist plan. they talk about Judea and Samaria. They're talking about the expulsion of the Palestinians. They're talking about the settlements, the Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and so on and so forth, the annexation of the Golan Line, and even beyond that. We could see this is from the first Trump administration, and still this thing going on. We see that his donor class, mostly made out of Zionists, hardcore billionaire class Zionists, who are not only with the Likud, they are with the hardcore messianic Zionism, in which they would like to see not only a greater Israel, they want to see all the Palestinians out of Palestine. So this is what we are facing. And because this is what we're facing, and Iran has been a steadfast supporter of the Palestinian resistance, they want to go and break up Iran, or at least try to strip it from its powers, such as the missile program, the nuclear peaceful program, as well as its support for the resistance movement. I think they're going to fail. I think it will be the biggest strategic mistake if Trump goes actually and bomb Iran, because he will be surprised to see that the response is going to come and haunt him, not only globally in terms of the economic collapse and perhaps even a defeat, military defeat, but also Israel is going to pay a heavy price, in which case the dynamics in the region would change, the strategic calculations would change. And I believe that the Muslim countries will have the guts after that to start speaking up on behalf of the rights of the Palestinians.
My own sense is, and once again, Allah is Al-Alim, but my own sense is that this attack will come, and it'll come in different waves. It'll have the decapitation strikes, degradation, and the rest of it. But I also believe that what you're saying with reference to how the internal conversation in the Muslim majority countries will change, because right now there is a great discrepancy between how the states are behaving and how the societies look at this. So exactly. I think there's going to be a lot of turmoil. So we're going to go through a phase of chaos and turmoil before there is a reset of these states, where societies and states come into harmony with each other. How long will that take? Obviously, is part of unknown. But I think before I close the program, there are a couple of things, like people talk about this two-state solution. I've written about it. I've said, well, it's neither here nor there. There's never a two-state solution. It's just a chimera. 29 days before Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated, when he presented the Oslo II agreement for ratification in the Knesset, if one goes and reads his speech, he's making it very clear that this is not about Palestinian sovereignty. This is not about Palestinian state. This is just about peace and a Palestinian administrative, authority. And in January 2024, Netanyahu said this at a nationally televised conference, and I quote from what he said: "In any future arrangement, Israel needs security control over all territory west of the Jordan. This collides with the idea of sovereignty for Palestinians. What can you do?" The truth, this truth I tell to our American friends, and I put the brakes on the attempt to coerce us to a reality that would endanger the state of Israel. So it's all about, one state from the river to the sea, one state from the Zionist perspective, where the Zionists are in control of the three commons, where they are in control of the Palestinian destinies, of Palestinian lives, the biopolitics, Foucauldian biopolitics, and the rest of it. But thank you so much, Dr.
If I may say, just for a couple of minutes, about there is no two-state solution. That train has come and gone. The number of settlers in 1993 were less than 115,000. Today, they are approaching 1 million. They are annexing Palestinian territories in the West Bank. There is absolutely no one is talking about two-state solution within the Israeli body of politics. And I think what we need to do is to realize this, and those who are trying to put their heads in the sand and act as if that there is a political horizon, they're trying to escape the reality. And this is the reality. The bottom line is that we need to redefine the Palestinian issue This is no longer a Palestinian problem. It's an Israeli problem that every country in the region, every Muslim country, every Arab country, and the whole world, frankly, need to deal with. The problem is we are facing a regime that wants to be the hegemon, that wants to keep this region weak, fragmented, dependent, unable to defend itself, and unable to unite, unable to progress. And this region, the people here will never accept that. And therefore, the only solution really that can rally not just the Palestinians, and it's the first solution, is to dismantle the apartheid nature of the regime. If people had any kind of apprehension about this, after the genocide, there should be absolutely no apprehension. We're dealing with a regime that is willing to use whatever means at its disposal in order to impose its will, and that is unacceptable. And therefore, how do we dismantle the regime is the question at hand. And this is doable, because when we talk about dismantling a regime, we're talking about a regime that is illegitimate. It's a settler colonial regime that's trying to impose its racist ideology on everyone else. And that could happen by knowing and understanding its sources of power and trying to confront it on every sphere, every society. Eventually, that's how you reach justice, not just for the Palestinians, but for everyone, including saving Judaism from this racist, a supremacist ideology that is trying to destroy not just the Jewish people, but also the whole region.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more with you. I mean, this is one of the reasons that I refer to it only as a Zionist entity, because there is, as far as I'm concerned, there is no state of Israel. It's an illicit settler colonial, implant. Europe pushing its Jewish problem into Palestine. But thank you so much, Dr. Sami Al-Arian. Pleasure talking to you. This is all from this episode. If you like the discussion, do click on the subscribe button and give us feedback. Until our next episode, goodbye and stay safe.